Theology Unplugged.
Welcome to Theology Unplugged. I'm Michael Patton, and this is our third question-answer session since we started through Theology in a Year. So you remember, if you want a question answered throughout the week, as we're going throughout the week, you're going to have to send it to me somehow. Now, I got various questions that people have sent to me, and so far, it's filled up the docket each time. And so I don't know, it's just, I guess whoever sends it to me first, whatever question is the clearest, that kind of thing. I try to get a variety of questions so it's not the same type stuff. But if you want to be a part of this, you're going to have to go to, well, you're not going to have to. The best way is to go here, become a patron. That's the best way to support me if you're wanting to support, if you like what I'm doing. Also, whenever you're on Patreon, you go down to the chat area, there's a place that says at the top, at least it's at the top on mine, question and answers for Through Theology in a Year or Theology Unplugged. It says something like that. It should be easy to find. Either way, I look at them all, everything on that thread, I always do. So you can put it there. That's the best place to put it. That's where some people put it, but I've gotten them through various places this time, and that's fine, as long as I can find them. There's just so many ways to get in contact with people now. It's Facebook and email and my chat, and then the discussion box everywhere. So anyway, I'd love to hear your questions. I'd love for you to get involved with our community. Again, just go down there to patreon.com/C Michael Patton and check it out. Also, if you want to donate to this ministry, if you want to see us grow, if you want to see what we are doing, go to credohouse.org and you can kind of see the big picture. You can kind of see some of the plans that we have. But right now, this is Through Theology in a Year, and I'm glad you are with us. I hope that this is encouraging to you, and I hope that the Lord blesses our time here together. Like I said, we got good questions. So let's go ahead and get started with them. And this is somewhat random that I'm asking these as I put them together. But and if you asked a question, I kind of summarized it down to a shorter question. Because sometimes they're really long, and then I just kind of try to get the gist of it and move on from there. So let's start with the first one. This is Matt. How can we be justified in believing that the supernatural world does exist? So an apologetics question here. Apologetics simply means defending the faith. So this is a question about in defense of the Christian faith. And it says, how do we know... let me start over. How can we be justified in believing that the supernatural world does exist? How do we know that further science and information will not eventually explain what we think today is supernatural? Really good question. Like I said, apologetics question, kind of a worldview question. And I guess what you're saying is you're kind of looking at this and you're saying, hey, I don't want to, have mud in my face later on in life, or even centuries later, they look back at us and see that we were stupid. Kind of like whenever people look at lightning, whenever people look at, illnesses and see that demons cause them or God directly causes lightning. I don't want to have mud on my face. Here's the thing. The supernatural does not depend upon whether or not we find something out there that is unexplainable. Okay, the supernatural world is not, we don't believe in it because we've seen miracles or we attribute something to a miracle. The supernatural world exists out of necessity. This is something that is foundational to philosophy. See, this is a science question here, and it's trying to use science to explain the supernatural world. And it's fine to be able to look at things and to be able to see miracles. And even whenever you look back at people in the old times and they have illnesses and they have lightning, it doesn't make those things any less supernatural because we attributed them to a different cause. Lightning still is supernatural at its very philosophical foundation because we always ask, why does it exist and not exist? What does it do in this world? How does it contribute to this world? Why does it happen at certain times? All of those things are part of an ordered universe that assumes a supernatural world. It is something that we look at and we say, if you limit your justification of a supernatural world view to being able to scientifically explain certain events in a supernatural way, you're probably going to have some problems because most of the time we are going to be somewhat wrong. We're not going to understand it quite completely, but it doesn't take away from the awe of the universe. You see, here's the awe of the universe, is that it happened, and that it happens, and that it is something that continues to happen. But the problem is with us is that we see things out there. We see a bolt of lightning, and we've seen it so many times it's become just normal for us. It's not extraordinary anymore. We don't wonder at it. We don't wonder at the outside world. We don't wonder at the existence of other people. We don't wonder at relationships. We don't wonder whenever a baby's born. Well, I did quite a bit whenever my first baby was born. It seemed like it was a supernatural thing. I heard about it all the time. Never seen it. Couldn't believe it. It was just crazy. I just remember thinking, I cannot believe this is actually happening, that this stuff actually happens. I've heard about it, but and you see those things, you see it peek out every once in a while whenever you kind of are in awe or in inspiration of things. But everything has to have a supernatural explanation to it. Natural explanations will not do in philosophy for the very beginning of things. Therefore, they will not do for the continuation of things. So anytime we are out there, we may misattribute things in our world. We may misattribute sicknesses or some type of healing, but it doesn't make the healing any less inspirational. Just because that kind of healing happens all the time. Just because the body can naturally heal itself and it doesn't do it in some way that we can't explain, that requires divine intervention to go around what we can already explain, that doesn't make it any less supernatural. So you got to change your worldview basis. You got to understand from the very get-go, from the very consciousness of life, you and I are aware of a supernatural world. We just it becomes normal. And so I think that's the best way to look at it, because if you start looking at it this way, if I was trying to answer and say, hey, here's how you find a true miracle, then I'm feeding this question's kind of, and I'm not the question is a good question, really good question, but I don't want to feed the underlying worldview or the underlying assumptions that may be leading into this, because it won't lead to a good place, because we won't ever be able to explain everything. Gosh, I shouldn't say this long on this, but whenever you require an explanation for everything, you're always going to be able to go a step further. You're always going to wait. You're always going to see things in such a way as, well, we just can't explain it yet. It is something that is odd, yes. It is something that we don't know how it happened, yes. But one day we'll probably be able to explain it. If you start with that and that determines your supernatural worldview, then you're going to be continually searching for some type of certainty that your methodology will not provide. It cannot provide it. By definition, it cannot provide it, because by definition, you're always searching for the further explanation. Let me give you an illustration. Let's say you're one of those type of people who just say, listen, I can't commit yet because I need a scientific explanation, or there may be a scientific explanation later on. So maybe while it may look supernatural, I saw this recently where a guy was talking about a great miracle that happened, where a guy obviously died, was determined dead. He's been dead for a long time. And then he comes back to life. And then they said, would you believe in the supernatural then? And he said, well, I don't know. No, I probably wouldn't, because I always know that later on there might be some type of explanation where I don't know, and I shouldn't commit myself to that worldview. And I thought to myself, what in the world? I mean, that can go on forever. That you could die Literally, you hold on to this worldview, not worldview, but methodology. You hold on to this methodology, it will determine a worldview that will present yourself with this situation. Listen to this. You will die, go to heaven, and while you're in heaven, you may be looking at God, you may be going through judgment. There may be all kinds of things around you, but you can still say to yourself while you're sitting there, this is really odd. One day we'll be able to explain this scientifically. We'll be able to explain this naturally. You can come before God himself and you can say, listen, I can't commit myself to you yet because I don't know really whether or not you are God. He could send you to hell and you could be burning in hell and you could say, one day we'll be able to explain this. You see what I'm saying? It's never ending by definition. And so whenever you have to start with something beyond. You have to start with something that is transcendent to us in order to explain everything. Therefore, you have to start with a supernatural worldview. I hope I hope that made sense. It was a really good question, but it is important because I see this methodology all the time. And it just will not work in the real world. It will work in your individual circumstance, and it's good. It's good. The scientific method is incredibly good at determining certain things, but not the things beyond it that explain the very scientific method that causes it to exist, that brought the scientific method into existence itself. In other words, it cannot explain itself. Okay, you see what I'm saying? We won't get to the scientific method that finally tells us what the scientific method is or why the scientific method is. Really, it's the why. Or why it is we think this goes so far, why it is that we think the scientific method could actually produce true knowledge. Why is that? That's a supernatural thing to say that we can come to true knowledge. If there's no supernatural, it is absolutely impossible for us to ever claim true knowledge simply because without a supernatural, all you have is a random process of events that you can never trust. Why would you trust it? Why is there even such a thing as trust? Trust itself is just a random event caused in a complex organism that suddenly became conscious that we can't understand any of it, but it's just a random thing. Trust itself is random. Therefore, you can't ever trust anything if you start with that. There's no such thing as your ability to have confidence at all in anything. If you have confidence in something, if you do think you're right about something, that is assuming a supernatural worldview. You see what I'm saying? That's kind of a presuppositional type approach. Okay, that took too long on that. Didn't mean to go that long. Alan says, does the assumed demand for the justice of God outweigh his stated attribute of love and grace? Quote, unquote, God is love. Well, here's the thing you got to understand, Alan. When we'll get to this one, we get to Trinitarianism, and it's fascinating. It really is, because it's not something we just believe, just like we were talking about beforehand. Not something we just believe because the Bible tells us this. We believe it out of necessity. Whatever God is, this is going to sound weird, just hang with me. Whatever God is, he is. Okay? In other words, we believe, and like I said, we'll get into a lot of this in Trinitarianism and hopefully be able to take what is so incredibly, it's ineffable beyond understanding, but it's necessary. It's necessarily ineffable because we believe in a God who is outside of time, space, and matter. He has to be. He can't be inside of time, space, and matter. Otherwise, time, space, and matter could not have come into existence. They're all corollary. So we start with a transcendent God. But what is involved in transcendence? Transcendence automatically doesn't imply, but necessitates oneness. And what I mean by that is this. There's a doctrine called, or a attribute of God called the simplicity of God. And it's a very important starting point for our understanding of God. God is simple. He is not composed of parts. You cannot divide God into parts. You cannot divide God into emotional parts. You can't divide God into physical parts. You can't divide God into extension in space parts. You know, whatever extension in space means to us, it's not the same thing to him because space doesn't exist. You can't divide him into temporal parts. There are no parts that you can divide God into. He is absolute oneness. That's part of the reason why when we have the nature of God and we talk about the Trinity, he is one in essence. His ontology, his essence, the stuff that he actually is above time and space, which it's not as if here I am teaching theology and I say, one day you'll be able to understand it like me. No, it stops. It stops at a certain point. The simplicity of God is, once you get outside of time, space, and matter, you are in a realm that is necessary, but is ineffable, beyond our understanding. So whenever you're talking about how do we look at God's love and his justice, he is love, but also he is justice. You cannot separate in any sense his love from his justice because he is not divided into parts. He is love justice. If you could turn that into one word, that's what it would be. And then you add all the other attributes, and that's the one word of God. But we do the best we can because we live in a world that's composed of parts. We live in a world where there's divisions made, there's distinctions made. But within God, there is no distinctions between his attributes. His love is his justice, and his justice is his love, because everything that he is, he is. The greatest name for God that he gave was at the very beginning to Moses, I am the being one. I am Yahweh. I am that I am. And the lexicon, and the Greek translation of the Old Testament, it has the participle used there, and it says, "I am the being one." That's the best we got, but he is. He has to be the being one. He's the one who exists transcendently in his own essence, in his own being. He is the one who just is. Anselm called him the necessary being. I think that's a great name for it, but I don't know if that's really what you were asking, that deep of theological statement. Maybe you were asking something more about why when he uses his love and when he uses his justice. But just understand this. I hope I understood you rightly, that God is what he is. Therefore, he is justice and he is love. You cannot distinguish those things. Okay, John, why is prayer for the nations often neglected in churches despite Jesus' call for his house to be a house of prayer for all nations? How could lives and communities improve if prayer was emphasized and practiced on a daily basis in the local churches? I read this earlier, John, right before I got on and put this in here. And I thought about it at first, and I was like, I can't answer that. Because it's true. The implication of what you're saying is absolutely true. It is a prayer that his house. What was his house at the time? Whenever Jesus said that, that was the temple. The temple represented the priest, the place that the priests were, where the priests came in and represented the people to God. So Christ is saying this place is a place of representation. Whoever is in here is representing people to God. This is the place where you meet God. And so one of the things that is a little bit different here, and I'm not disagreeing at all with you about prayer being so important and churches being able to focus on prayer, but one of the things that I think is important here to understand is that there was the temple. There was only the temple. There was the veil that separated God from everybody else, and nobody could come in the temple. Nobody could come into the Holy of Holies. Whenever Christ died, that veil ripped and tore. And so it's not necessary that we go to a church, because we are all the church now everywhere. We are all his temple everywhere. You see, it's something that we are now and we can do in our place. I'm not discrediting praying in church. I think it's very important. I read about Charles Spurgeon and his emphasis on prayer about his church. I forgot what they called it, in the bottom basement, the war room maybe is what they called it, where they continually had people never stopping praying for people outside of the church. And I know this. John Hanna, one of my history professors, I talk about him all the time because he was such a great influence on me. Gosh, it's 25 years, and he's still like the first thing that comes up whenever I think about so many things. But anyway, he talked about, and this is going to go in a different direction than you think. It really is. And I didn't even plan to bring this up, but he talked about the mystery of God. He talked about how we don't understand him, and one of the things he talked about was the great prayer revival in America, where prayer broke out, and it was in New York, I believe it was, where it started. I don't know, 7,500 years ago. I'm not really sure exactly when that took place. I haven't studied the prayer revival in any sense, but there was a prayer revival that burst out, and people were just coming and continually praying in New York. And he talked about this in such a way that went in a different way than I thought it was going to go. And he said, there's times whenever prayer breaks out, and we can look at it in history, and we can see these great prayer revivals of people and in the church. We don't know why they happen. They just happen. And then we can see times whenever it's not happening. And he says, but the problem is, God works when he works. He wants us to pray, but it's not like we can look in history and see that these prayer revivals brought about a big difference or any difference at all. And so, and he had a tendency to try to do the shock value theology sometimes, I think. But at the same time, I looked at it and I was like, if that's true, God does what he does at all times, but we continue to do what we're supposed to do, and that is continue to pray and continue to pray for nations and people everywhere. And so it is very important, but I don't know if that would bring about God's revival and God's change. I don't know if he would say, like St. Thomas Aquinas, that would be the means by which he brings about the revival, or if he just says, that is good, that's exactly what I want you to do, even though that's what I want you to do, and I brought you to do this, I'm not going to do it now, I'm going to do it in 100 years from now, whenever nobody's praying. And that's kind of what you see sometimes. It's you can't map God. You think that if you do A and B, C is going to happen. This goes down to the micro levels of our life where we're left confused and we don't understand why, if we were like this, if we've done this our whole life, and if we, followed a certain pattern, that pattern didn't produce what we thought it was supposed to, what it seemed that the Word of God told us that was the blessings of that, but we just kind of misunderstood sometimes. God is not obligated in any sense to us. He does not tie himself to us, and he doesn't allow himself to be mapped in such a way. And I think as long as we live with that, we do what's right, but we don't have any idea what's going to happen. I like that term. I like that phraseology. You can't map God. Right whenever you think you know what he's doing, he takes a different direction. And part of that is, are you still going to follow me? That's what Jesus did while he was walking the earth. Every single direction he took, nobody understood why he was doing what he was doing, how he was doing what he was doing, and saying what he was saying. And he'd get a big following, and then suddenly he'd turn right and they would turn left. They thought he was going this direction. He's like, nope, going over here. You guys can follow me. I mean that, metaphorically. Okay, let's see here. Eric asks, how does the role of indubitable and absolute certitude, so this is talking about what I was talking about, was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday. Certitude in epistemology, analogous to axioms and mathematical proofs. And Eric, you put together a great thing. I mean, it was like, just as an aside, I think I wrote you and told you that, but you kind of listed out, because you're a doctor, Eric's a doctor, and seems to be, really into a lot of research too, but goes down and lists everything that I talked about in philosophical epistemology and how they use that in science with axioms and stuff like that. It was very interesting to me. But here's the idea. How does the role of indubitable certainty influence our understanding of theological truths, considering that science lacks equivalent higher levels of certainty? I think, Eric, I mean, gosh, I think it affects the very even idea and assumption and reality and belief in science. In order to have a belief in science, you have to have some base level assumptions that are just understood, even though they cannot necessarily be proven. And these are called sometimes, and I hope I'm going the right direction, but these are called properly basic beliefs. And properly basic beliefs are those beliefs which we have that you really can't give any justification for. Properly basic beliefs are those things that are the base level beliefs that you build upon in every single area in order to have other coherence in every area. And some properly basic beliefs we have are the very idea of the law of non-contradiction, which is properly basic. I can't use the law of non-contradiction to prove the law of non-contradiction. It's just something we assume. The basic laws of logic are something we just assume, that logic is right. Well, how do you know logic's right? Well, because it just is, and it seems to work. Well, how do you know that can you doubt that and build that up from nothing? That's what Rene Descartes did, and that was his biggest problem, at least his biggest criticism, was later on. This came from David Hume, where he said, hey, here's the deal. He thought he was doubting everything. So the Cartesian method that doubted everything didn't really doubt everything. And so it doesn't really work. That was bad of Hume to say that it didn't work based upon this. Hume should have just understood that there were those properly basic beliefs. And I think Rene Descartes understood that as well. I haven't studied him specifically enough to see, but I think I've seen times whenever I'm looking at him that I see that he understood that there were properly basic beliefs. He just didn't emphasize it. So let me give you a list of properly basic beliefs. The existence of self, the belief that you exist, that is a properly basic belief that you cannot prove. Okay? You can use logic, something you can't prove, in order to determine this, but the existence of self, we are completely justified in believing, even though we cannot determine that. So the reason why I'm doing this is I'm building a foundation underneath all of those things you were talking about there, especially in the world that you live in. The existence of the external world. That's a really good one. I mean, are you sure that the external world exists? It's not all coming through in your mind. It's not just you producing everything and thinking there's an external world, but really the entire universe exists in your head. Well, I can't prove that. I can't. But at the same time, I am perfectly justified every day in not going crazy and staying in an existential crisis thinking that I'm the only one who exists. People do that. What are they called? Solipsism? Solipsists do not believe there's an external world. It's really funny. I mean, they're actually out there. Look it up. The reality of sense perception, the trust that information received from our senses is true. So whenever you look at something, whenever you're testing something, there is a reality to that. Even though it can deceive you, we talk about the basic reliability of sense perception, not the absolute reliability of sense perception. I mean, we have to do that every day whenever we drive down the street. We have to trust our senses, our eyes, that what we are seeing is actually happening. But we can't prove it. We just can't prove it. There's no base level to go underneath that. the existence of other minds. That's kind of like the existence of the outside world, the existence that other minds exist, that people are actually people, that they are other minds, that they are other conscious beings. Can't really prove it, but it's the same thing as the existence of the self outside of yourself, or the reality outside yourself. Laws of logic, memory. You trust your memory. You don't think that you were created today, 5 minutes ago, with pre-programmed memories that go back to your childhood, to whenever you're little, and then you just think you've lived longer than just 5 minutes. We all do, but we all could have been created 5 minutes ago with pre-programmed memories, and we just started this life. Could have been created 2 seconds ago. Okay, so that is something we're justified in believing. So I think the best way to look at this, mathematical truths is the same thing, moral principles is the same thing, the uniformity of nature, the continuation of the uniformity of nature, that it will be the same in the future as it is right now, or at least generally the same. I mean, there's all kinds of we don't understand how many things we just assume and how many things we just trust, and how much those do have a underlying supernatural component. But at the same time, I think one of the most properly basic beliefs is the belief in God. At its base level, you cannot prove it like a Cartesian would, or want to. But you get down, and it's necessary. It's a necessary belief. It's something that we have to have in order to make the next steps, just like all these other properly basic beliefs. The term properly basic belief came from Alvin Plantinga, who is a great philosopher. I think he's still maybe adjunct at Notre Dame. I'm not sure, but I've talked to him before a couple of times, and really a great guy. Alvin Plantinga is so incredibly smart. Molinist. But, he's a philosopher. Of course, they're going to be Molinists. They have to solve everything. But one of the greatest living philosophers there is. But he's the guy who coined properly basic belief, even though there were some axioms beforehand. So the basic axioms of all life that go underneath everything are there. We just have to, look at them and define them. And it's a great thing to think about. Okay. Hopefully that helped. I don't know. God's justice. What time are we at? God, we're already at 40 minutes. I got a few more left. I'm going to try to get through these and not spend so much time. I get too excited about every theological question. Okay. Alan says, does the assumed demand... Oh, no. Okay. I'm sorry. We don't have that many more questions. We already did. Okay. What John says, what does it mean to apply the fear of God? The words fear God are in critical places in the Bible. In your opinion, how can that be understood and applied in ordinary Christians? I think the best way to do this, and Tad, I'm doing that deal, Conversations with Tad, and Tad has asked this question a lot of times, saying he has a problem with the idea of fear of God because all he feels is God's love. And it's kind of the same thing. You can fear his love. Fear is not something that you're scared of. Okay, it can imply that. I mean, there is an element to this that you are scared, but fear has to do with standing in awe of something. It is so great that it's not that you think it's going to do something, but what it can do. And Tad, you told me this one time, and ever since then, this was a long time ago. If you're listening, Tad, I have no idea whether you're listening, but you told me a long, long time ago, whenever we were teenagers, I don't know, maybe we were at Padre Island, on spring break. That's all I'll say about that trip. But I think you said you were scared to death of the ocean because it was so big and anything it could just swallow up and anything could be gone. And ever since then, I've taken that. I've been scared too. And it's like, I was like, you're right. It can just, anything you put on top of the ocean, it will go under and you'll never see it again. And so there's a great fear that I have of the ocean. But it's not so much I'm scared, it's just this fear of what's there. the mystery behind it, how big it is, how vast it is. It has nothing to do with the normal type of thing that God is telling us to fear. He's saying, I'm like the ocean. I'm that big. I'm that powerful. It's like, another way to put it is like with your dad. Many of us have had fathers that we feared. And at least all the problems with my dad, I did fear him. And I did stand in awe of him and respect him. And I think we have this natural element to do that with our dads, even if we have no reason to be scared of them. We go in there, and that's our dad. He's the biggest thing in our life. He's the most powerful thing in our life. He's the one that can do anything, and he's the one that I want to be like in every single way. Now, maybe you don't have a dad like that, but at the same time, you may be able to get this understanding that that's the fear, it's the awe, it's the kind of, when we're talking about God, it's the majesty of God. And so when we're talking about fearing God, that's it. But I don't want to imply that it can't also imply that it can swallow you up. And if it tells you it's going to swallow you up, that's a scary thing because of what it can do. Now, when we're talking about God as Christians, we stand in awe of him, but we know he is the most powerful thing in the world protecting us. But it doesn't mean it takes away the majesty and the greatness of it. He's 10 trillion oceans. I mean, I don't know how we can grab a hold of that. But that's what's so good about theology. That's what's so good about mystery. That's what's so good about, these things we don't understand because we stand in fear of we don't understand. In the ocean, I don't know what's swimming underneath me. It scares me to death. It really does. I don't go in the ocean. Not just because of what Tad said, because things that are swimming under me, I don't know what it's going to do. And there's some sense in which we stand before God and he can do anything. And as we study theology, the more we learn about him, the more we learn about his greatness, this mystery, these things we don't know, it just produces this great fear, even though he says, I will always protect you in this ocean, and he can. It's just like, so, hopefully that helped. I'm always just saying, hopefully that helped. Okay, John, last one. Oh, let's see here. John, why are there not lots of Protestant monasteries and convents? Why do they rarely exist for 2,000 years? Well, with Protestants, we haven't existed necessarily for 2,000 years. And so in the early church, yes, there were. And so here's the thing. What are monasteries for? And I think you mentioned something about you would love to be able to go to one. You're getting at an age where you're just like, you want to be around other people only that are Christians and that are doing the same type of thing and praying and just a very spiritual life. Now, I think, and this is just my opinion, John, okay? And I don't want to, I don't know. I think this is important. I think that we as Protestants should not do those types of things. Not at certain times in your life, not at certain situations. But there was a thing about the monastery, there was a thing about asceticism in the early church where you had these certain real spiritual people that would go live in the desert or go live in monasteries by themselves, take vows of silence, take vows of not, any type of fasting, not eating or not talking to people or not ever getting married, all those kinds of things. These are things that we at least looked at one time and we said, man, that person is incredibly spiritual. I'm not saying they're not either. I'm not saying this says you're not. I'm just saying, here's what God has called us to do, to go into the world. And if I sometimes I envy people that are not around anybody, that are in those types of situations, that take vows of silence, because I'm always the one who's getting myself in trouble. I'm one of those type that can just mess everything up so quickly. And I am a sinner. And part of the reason, or maybe I'd say 90% of the reason I'm a sinner is because of other people. And I'm not saying it's their fault. I'm saying without them, for me, if they were gone, I wouldn't have negative thoughts towards them. I wouldn't have anger towards them. I wouldn't have, pride towards them. I wouldn't have the envy towards them. It's all of these things that are with other people that create such a degree of sinfulness. I guess that's why half the commandments are based upon our relationship with other people. You remove those other people, and yes, you remove, and I'm not saying you're saying let's remove other people, but you remove our sinfulness in that area, which would be great. Like I said, remove most of the sin, and therefore I don't have to worry about it quite so much anymore. How I feel about people, or my relationship with my wife, or am I self-giving enough? Everything that just goes into it. And so I think that's not what we are supposed to do. I think we're supposed to be engaged in the world, in a hard world, that at the same time, yes, there are so many more opportunities for sin, but there's so many more opportunities for goodness and the fulfillment, the Great Commission, and people to see you. Now, I'm not sure, at whenever you're saying at my age, this is where I want to be. You've lived your whole life in such a way of service to the Lord. I know that. And maybe there is that to where you can get to that point to some degree. You've done your stuff. You've done your work, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not your age, and I don't know where these emotions are coming from. I very much respect them, but whenever I think of going out in some type of ascetic life, Simon Stylites went and lived on a pole in the desert, not a man-made pole, a desert pole. He lived on top of that for 40 years. 40 years he never came down, I swear. Look it up. Simon Stylites, 40 years, never came down. Just had food lifted up to him. I don't know what he did with other stuff, but I thought, man, that's getting away, and that takes commitment. But at the same time, it probably removed a lot of opportunity to do wrong because it's just with other people. So it removed a lot of opportunity to do right. People may have admired him. I don't know if he was preaching from the top. I don't think he was, but he's the idea, I go off and I'm devoted to God alone. I don't know if that's what God has called us to do, but he may have called you to do something different. So that is my opinion in that area. And it's very, I'm very, just take it for what it is. Okay, guys, listen, thank you all for showing up. I really, really appreciate it. Again, if you have any questions for next week, next Friday, we'll keep on dynamically changing this. This will get better and better, and we'll change it according to what it is that we're able to do. Like maybe have live sessions after every session. We'll just see how it goes. But for now, this is the way we're doing it. Go to Patreon and go to the chat area. Please become a member, support this ministry. I'm doing lots of stuff. I really am. It's something that I think is worthy of your commitment, so long as you believe in this kind of stuff. You believe in making theology accessible. You believe in ironic theology that is done peacefully, accurately representing every view. You believe in helping people believe more today than they did yesterday, and you believe in the centrality of Jesus Christ, and that he is our center and everything else is secondary to him. If you believe in all those things, that's what I believe in. And so I ask you to support. That's what I need. That's how I make my living. Okay, guys, thank you very much, and we will see you next Monday.
Theology